Welcome back to another episode of Profitless on Purpose, the podcast that's all things nonprofit from an accountant's perspective, and not just one accountant, but four very talented accountants today. With us today, we got Lisa Sheldon.
Hello.
Tammy Hess.
Hi.
Mark Palardy.
Hey there.
And I'm AJ Wheeler. This week we have an exciting episode. We got a couple articles for everybody. First article up is how Biden's tax increases will hopefully help charitable nations, or will they? We'll find out. Finding the right messenger for your message. Who should deliver your message, how to craft it, what those people should look like, and how to get the most out of delivering your messages to the affected people you would like to direct it to. Last, celebrities, and kind of a follow-up to the previous article, celebrities aren't as influential with youth donors and activists these days. But who is? Is there somebody out there that can help? Anyway, we'll find out. And then lastly, we'll talk about annual budgets for your organization, how to make them, how detailed they should be, when you should deploy them, should you change them. We'll talk all about that today on the podcast. But Lisa, why don't you kick us off with our first article?
Got an article that talks about Joe Biden's tax cut or his tax increases and how that would help charity. So it was kind of interesting to read it because as you think about it, logically, you think tax increases, that gives me less money. And how am I going to have more money to give to charity? So as most news goes, the title of the article really does not portray the entirety of the article or the entire truth about the article. It really is focused more on affluent givers and those who are going to be affected by the changes in capital gains taxes, which would be anybody that's making over $400,000 a year. And so basically what they're saying is it's going to be an incentive to give to charity, to give that property or the stock that's got an appreciative value. And they're talking about how that could be beneficial to you because it's a tax break to give you that tax break. So you're not paying all those capital gains, plus you're getting that charitable deduction in the year. So it does make some sense. I think that as I started to read the article, it does talk about the effect of the tax plans and how, this is going to happen. But I went and I looked at some other things that weren't talked about in the article that kind of need to be considered as well. And we're capping the benefits, or the plan is to cap the benefits of itemized deductions to 28% of the value for anybody that makes over $400,000 a year. So you're limiting you get limited itemized deductions. So, you may or may not really be getting a tax benefit by making this contribution. You really have to work with your tax advisor and look at what you're getting. But one of the things that financial advisors are recommending is that these high wealth individuals, ways that they can avoid some of the tax penalties on this or not tax penalties, but taxes themselves, is to look at charitable remainder trusts, annuities, and donations of appreciated stock. And those are areas which they can probably take the most benefit. So the article was pretty lengthy and talked a lot about the tax code and things like that. But I think the key points are that, these are something that high wealth individuals could look into as ways to avoid paying taxes and hopefully then also benefit charitable organizations by giving them much needed funds.
Yeah, I thought it really, for me, I guess, when I was reading the article, I found that this is kind of an extension of what happened with the tax cuts change that under Trump, the previous administration had done, and a shift, I think, that we've seen on the ground in those donor advised funds, the gift of stock, you talked about, Lisa, appreciated capital, essentially, this to get away from capital gains. And I see this as just further kind of accelerating that kind of donation scheme, or that kind of donation gift of, instead of just paying cash money to somebody, you're actually transferring some kind of land, some kind of capital asset that you have, whether it be stock, land, whatever it may be. So I guess it's not, I don't necessarily know, and I'd love to see figures around it, whether the, charities have received more donations, or if the amount of donations have just shifted from a cash basis to more like donor advised funds, more foundation funds, and more of this, stock, I guess, donations or capital asset donations. I think that would be interesting to look at, but I don't know that I've seen those numbers. So I think that's really the question here. Like the article is kind of stating that we're going to see more donations, but I think from being on the ground and looking at like the organizations we work with or the organizations that we're affiliated with, that I don't necessarily know we've seen an increase in individual donors, over the last 4 to 6 years. I think it's probably remained the same, just where it's coming from might be different. So although it sounds good in theory, and I think that's what they're going for in like this, tax plan or this taxation plan that they want to enroll, I don't necessarily know that it'll add to more donations.
Yeah, so that's, and I was looking at that too. And I think what this article really kind of, really inspired me to think about is the timing of things, right? Because I think what this is going to do is really people are going to need to plan way in advance in terms of what is their planning of charitable giving method going to be. Because, I think that there's been, some folks who get throughout the year and it's, the last week of December and they're like, oh, I need to, do a big donation or do all this kind of stuff in order to get the tax benefit. Gifting land or gifting stock is not going to be done that easily, I don't believe. So it's almost like the donor needs to really think about what their strategy is going to be. And so they have enough time to really do that and also think about how that's going to help. And on the flip side, I think that the recipients of these types of gifts and donations are really going to need to think about how they're going to handle that, because it's a much different. Cash is a lot easier to use right away, or even if it's restricted and all those things, people are normally used to getting cash. Getting, land or stock or those types of capital assets are going to be a little bit difficult, I think, for people to figure out, oh, thank you, I got this big acre of property. What am I going to do with it? How's it going to help my organization? Do I convert it to cash? I think a lot more planning and thinking is going to be involved in this change if this is the way that it's going to go. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think this is just more work for tax preparers and for financial planners, because you have a situation where the capital gains rate is proposed to double above $1 million. So people who are making that kind of money have complex investments as it is, and they're going to have to really drill down and figure out what they want to do. I think AJ's right. We might not see anything in the short term. It might be this comes in the form of bequests and things that happen after people pass. And as a result, that creates a whole nother morass for people in the nonprofit world, because they've got a plan like, okay, I'm getting this bequest, but now I have to kind of follow actuarial tables to figure out when this person might actually move on and we might be seeing some of that money. So it makes it a little harder to budget, teaser. But, we have a complex system. The other thing that I noticed when reading this, it's like, it's Groundhog Day, because we get a Republican administration and it's the death tax, and then all taxes have to go down and everything changes and everybody's got to figure this out. And then the Democratic administration comes in and we've got to raise revenues and now we're taxing the rich. And so it just seems like this bounces back and forth to kind of, I don't know how you do it, especially if you're a high wealth individual. Mind you, I wouldn't mind finding out, but I think the complexity just bounces back and forth. And who knows what this will look like in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years. But my favorite part of the article was the very tail end, where the grandmother or grandfather is sitting down with their grandkids telling them why they weren't inheriting money. But let's choose a charity we can give all your inheritance to. That made me chuckle. Anyway, so AJ, I think you have an article for us.
I do. This is from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and it's finding the right messenger for your message. Now, the article kind of goes through, there's like 8 messengers to transform the message, and it talks about there being 3 parts to effective communication: the message itself, the messenger, and then the distribution of that message. And so it talks about messengers who transform knowledge, and it kind of breaks down, in 3 categories, who the expert is, the witness is a person with direct, of course, the expert would be a trusted authority on the issue. The witness would be somebody that has direct knowledge or experience with the issue. And then the affected would be the person that it has the most impact. So, it gives several examples of that. Then it has the messenger who transforms value. So the guide, the person who embodies the core values of this, and the converted, people who used to be skeptical but share similar values and change their thinking because of this. The vanguard, somebody who represents the very leading edge of a movement. The trendsetter, somebody who's early to adopt and exhibit new ideas. And then the friend or ally, the person who is a connector, who feels familiar to your audience and who your audience naturally wants to spend time with. So then it kind of goes through and it does some other stuff, reaching the unaware, how to distribute this message. But I think and it's quite a long article, and I would say to any of our listeners, we have it in the description if you're watching on YouTube, or, again, it's finding the right messenger for your message if you want to Google it and look at it, because I think there's a lot of good information there, and it has scenarios regarding, I guess, how to present your message. But the real reason why I picked the article and why I was thinking about it was because I think often nonprofits and even us accountants, we spend so much time crafting a message, and we think so much about how we're going to distribute that message and how we're going to get it out to people, but we don't often think about the person delivering the message and how much that affects how it's received in the community or to your audience. And so I think about the old comedic saying, right? Know your audience, know the room. So, you don't want some affluent person presenting to a bunch of underprivileged or underserved communities, because they're an outsider, I guess, or so I think finding the right person to craft, not only just help craft the message but deliver it is so important. It's something that I don't think we think of often. So I'd like to get your guys' take on whether maybe the article's off base and, anybody can present that message, but I'd like, maybe some experience from our panel on, messages that fell flat, or any advice we can give when crafting a message and how to deliver that, and picking the right person to do so, would be, I think, helpful for not only the accounting community, and the nonprofit community, but anybody listening that has a message that needs to be heard.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think it's definitely an interesting article. We're going to follow this up with one that's a little more pointed and kind of builds off of this next. But I think the idea of picking your messenger is really important, because, like you said, if your organization is tone deaf and you're putting the same person out to every single audience, you're not going to get the same response. And one of the people that I related to, or one of the roles, was the active skeptic in here, where you have somebody who kind of listens to a pitch and goes, yeah, I don't know about that. And you're trying to appeal to that active skeptic. The people who are already into your organization or already believe in your mission, they're on board, right? So you want to get the people who are on the fence, or maybe slightly, uninterested, and approach them from a different direction that they're not expecting, or presenting your information in a way that really makes sense to where they're coming from, and make them go, oh yeah, I can really see the benefit of this organization. And I think finding that is a key component of building your donor base. And I think I hadn't really thought about it in these terms before, but I think it's a really interesting way to approach this.
Yeah, Mark, I agree with you. I think that, in a little different vein, I did a lot of work in an organization, and the converted folks were really the ones that helped drive the message, right? When we were trying to get people who are actively disengaged because, management says we should do this. So we're the people working out in the field, and we don't want to do that because management says so. Once we got those people on board, or once we got a few people converted, people started to listen, and people started to understand what was trying to happen. And so I think that really does drive that home. I will tell you, though, that anywhere I see a celebrity hawking anything, I tend to just close my ears. And that's me, but they're getting paid for that. They're not doing that out of the goodness of their own heart. And so they'll say whatever somebody tells them to say, right? They're actors and actresses. So for me, that's a big turnoff. But I think that I like the alignment. I like how they kind of match people up in the article and say, these are the people that you should kind of get to work together to build knowledge and send a message. And a lot of times, as AJ said, we don't really think about that when we're crafting our message. And a lot of organizations don't. The one thing I would say for not-for-profits is that, of course, many of the smaller ones aren't going to have the luxury of being able to get those groups on board to send their message, right? They just don't have the luxury of getting, experts and trendsetters and, it's not there. But so they have to think about how they, as a smaller organization, without the funding, can actually get their messages across. But this is kind of a good baseline.
Yeah, I also agree with what everyone's saying. I think that the importance of a message, whether it be a good message or a bad message, is super important in all organizations. And I think it's right that a lot of times organizations will think about what message they're crafting or trying to display and spend a lot of time doing that idea of like, here's what we're going to say, or here's how we're going to say it, and maybe not think as much as to who's going to be able to deliver the message or who should deliver the message. Because I think that that's a valid point to what Lisa said is in her point of view, the celebrity influencer person is not going to be the one that motivates her to really hear the message. So you have to really figure out who your audience is and who should be the one that's delivering the message. The only caveat that I would throw into this is that the timeliness of all this probably needs to be shortened, because I know that in my experience, I've seen a lot of times where we work on a message and work so much on like what the message is, how we're going to deliver it, who's going to deliver it. And by the time that we're ready, it's, weeks or months have passed, and then the message is now old and doesn't really resonate with folks in that way too. So thinking about all those components makes it show really how important messaging is, but it also kind of causes some challenges if it takes too long to get the message out. So really planning and thinking that through is super important.
I think also too, thinking about what Lisa said about smaller organizations maybe not having like a social influence or a big name to deliver that message. I think for small organizations, thinking about, engaging the community and getting people on board, it doesn't always have to be somebody that's like employed at your nonprofit to deliver that message. It can be a really good way to engage like donors, the community that's affected by this, and bringing somebody on, to deliver that message might be a great way to engage the community and endear them to what you're trying to do. So I think, staying, agile about it and thinking, be forethinking, don't be locked into, because I crafted the message, I have to be the one that delivers it, so I think, there's opportunity there, I think, for engagement that sometimes is missed, I think, when you're thinking about delivering a good message. So our next article, Mark, do you have one for us?
You bet. I think this conversation we just had kind of rolls right into this, and we could maybe even look at it as a case study in what we were just talking about. And this article is entitled, "Celebrities Aren't Influencing Young Activists and Donors." So in this article, they kind of did a survey and a study to find out what young people between age 18 and 30 were interested in. And the two topics that were of most interest were animal safety and rights and civil rights. And they found that celebrities delivering that message were not coming across and were not really having much of an influence on this age group, but yet online influencers were. Now, I'm somebody who's maybe a little past the age of an influencer kind of a mentality, but I don't know, this might be just parsing words in my mind, but influencers in their own way are a form of celebrity. So I don't know if we can necessarily say they're influencers, not celebrities. We start getting influencers who have hundreds of thousands of followers, and all of a sudden that is a form of celebrity. But regardless, they said 51% of them felt that the influencers could give them this kind of information, where only 29% said they were listening to celebrities. So I think maybe that also has to do with a culture where if you're following an influencer, you might feel more a part of their community as opposed to this celebrity. If you're looking at Taylor Swift, like they mentioned in this article, this is somebody who's kind of unreachable, who's farther away, who maybe I'll listen to what they say, but their opinion is not going to matter that much to me. I think and again, the thing that amused me the most about this article was that from these influencers, 38% signed an online petition and 25% shared things on social media, but fewer than 10% donated money. So just keep that in mind when you're hiring some big influencer and you're paying them thousands of dollars to boost something on their Instagram feed. Your return on this varies. What do you guys think about this?
I think I don't want to sound ageist here, but I think the person writing the article might have been a little bit older than maybe the target demographic they're talking about, because I think in 2021, if you're asking like a young person, like they're describing in the article, they're going to much more relate to somebody that streams on Twitch or is a YouTube sensation or Vine. Now I'm dating myself. TikTok influencer, whatever you want to call these people. That is the new celebrity. They much know those people more than somebody that's on network television on CBS. That probably skews my age group probably a little bit more than, the 20 somethings that they're talking about. But I think, internet celebrities or influencers or whatever you want to call them, that is the new celebrity out there. People can be in movies, people can be in TV shows, and they're still considered a celebrity. But for this generation, really, it's online and digital means that's at the tips of your fingers at all times, and kind of 24/7 content that's available. So it's not unsurprising. And like Mark said, to have an online and such deep community connection, I guess, with the fans of an influencer or a community and that you've built online, the connections run deeper. And so, of course, they're probably listening to them more than some figurehead on TV that comes on once a week that's on a network television show that their parents watch, So, just like I think the generation before ours, they saw the newspaper writer and columnist as kind of a and the speaking heads on the TV weren't so, weren't as influential to them as they were for us, like an MTV show back in the day in the 80s or 90s. That was the peak celebrity of that time. And I think you see the switch here. So, but that's just my take. I don't know.
Yeah, I was reading this and thinking a lot of the same things that you guys were thinking. I think that at the end of the day, the type of celebrities were influencers, and now influencers are celebrities. So that mixed kind of definition it's helpful to know, to see like who are your audience listening to, and how are they motivated to do different things. I think the thing that really stuck out to me is like the sense of community. If you think about the influencers, really they have this community kind of action solving problem where they sign petitions or they do things that maybe they investigate. Like there's a community on crime on like YouTube crime shows where they are actively investigating the crime and they're doing all this kind of stuff. So they're actually really involved in kind of what they're doing. And I think what is interesting and what's fun to kind of watch is how involved the community is in doing something. So while I would say it would be interesting to see how that's converted to donation dollars or ways of giving, I do think that an influencer can really strongly suggest they see action from signing petitions or getting the information out there. But then it's like, what about the money donations or the time donations that are given? How do you influence those types of behavior in connection with making movements and doing actions that are otherwise non-financial or time-based?
And just to put a cap on this conversation, we here at Profitless on Purpose are open to being influencers. So make sure you mash that like button and hit subscribe so that we can soon be telling you where to give your nonprofit dollars as well. So our topic today is going to be introduced by Tammy.
So we're going to talk today about budgets, the annual budget to be specific. So in generalities, a budget is a guide that can help an organization plan for things to come within a period of time, usually a year. The organization's staff is typically responsible for creating a budget, determining the estimated amount of revenues, donations, and or expenses of the organization. So this can be done in a very detailed manner and then rolled up to a summary level to be presented to the board, who typically approves the budget through a board vote. But in thinking about this, the budget process can be very time consuming, and depending on the level of detail can be quite massive. So I thought it would be good for us to discuss, how can a budget be used once it's actually created? Is it one of those things where you create a budget and then put it on a shelf and dust collects on it? Or is there truly a use for it? And how is it used in an organization? And then the second kind of topic for us to talk about is, how detailed should an annual budget be?
So I can kind of start here because I have some opinions about this. Surprise, surprise. But I think how detailed your budget needs to be, and we're talking about the organizational wide budget here. We're not talking about specific program budgets or operating budgets. But I think when we're talking about an overall organizational budget, I think it really depends on how big and complex your nonprofit is. But I would say a rule of thumb would be to keep it as simple as possible, because what you don't want to do is muddy the waters with every little small expense, at a high level that you're going to be incurring. So, like grouping things in, like, instead of having a separate line item for rent and janitorial services and utilities, you can roll all that stuff up into, occupancy, or, kind of, an occupancy line that would, eliminate 4 or 5 individual line items on a budget. And I think from the perspective of being able to make one of these swiftly, because I've seen organizations take months and months to put one of these things together. And, sometimes it's even the start of the new fiscal year and they don't have a budget approved yet because they're still working on getting the one ready to have it approved. So I would say the thing to do is to get one out there, take your best stab at what's going on, and look at prior periods to try and estimate what you think it should be. And I think, then after that, one of the things Tammy talked about was being able, what do you do with it afterwards? I'm a big proponent of adjusting the budget as needed. If you get more, it shouldn't just be a static thing that, you have approved at the beginning of the year and then you just stick it there and present a budget to actual. If there's been major changes in, like, additions or, the losing of programs and revenue or personnel, I think you should adjust the budget to reflect that, because it really needs to be a living document sort of throughout the year to reflect where the organization has been and where it's going and what to expect for the year. So, but maybe somebody else has, I can see an argument made for keeping the budget static and learning from why it's so far off.
I'm going to argue for that, AJ, because I think the budget is a document that can be reforecast if there's extraordinary events. But I think keeping your original budget is helpful so that at the end of the year how good of a job you did. If you're changing it every month, then you're not necessarily tracking what you've actually thought was going to happen at the beginning of the year. But one of the things you alluded to, which I just kind of want to put a finer point on, is when you're creating your budget, I think, especially if you've been around a while, using past year's expenses is super helpful to help guide what budget categories you should have, because in some cases you're going to want to roll up all these small expenses into one category, but you may have a nonprofit where you have a very specific and difficult, you have multiple buildings and you want to track rent and utilities and all these things at different locations in different ways. And it depends on what's meaningful for your organization. So as you start looking at where your expenses are and how they break down year over year, that can help guide and speak to where your budgeting annual categories should go. What do you think, Lisa?
I agree with you, Mark. I think that reforecasting is better than changing your budget, right? I worked for a large multi-campus community college, and we looked at things in a number of ways, but it was programmatically. How did your programs do? It was by location, because each campus had a different demographic of students and they offered different programs. So it has to be what's meaningful for your organization. I agree that you don't want to go down to each specific line item in your budget, in your individual department budgets. You don't need to go to that level for that overarching budget, but you do need to understand what's happening within each of those areas, within each of those, in our case, in each of those campuses, each of those programs, in order to determine what the budget needed to be. So it was, and I can tell you, it was a tedious, long process from where we sat as people creating budgets and then, getting everything put together and consolidating all of that data. It's again, back to organizational size. If you're a small organization, you don't need to be that detailed, but in a large hundreds of millions of dollars organization, you probably need to spend some time focusing on a little more detail and rolling that all up.
Yeah. And I think that from what I've seen too, sometimes you have to get, you have people who are working on the budgets. They may need to be at that detailed level, but then they use it to roll it up into some kind of higher level viewpoint. And I think I would say in terms of whether a budget is static or not, I think for the most part, yes, it should be static. And when you're reviewing it, you say, hey, what happened? Like, why didn't the revenues hit the numbers? Was it because of, lower donations? Was it because we didn't have an event? Or was it because of X, Y, Z? And same thing with expenses, why, understanding the whys it happened. But then I do agree with AJ to a certain degree that if there is some significant change where it's going to be a change that there's no way of really being able to progressively address, to it or change it or have it go back to where the budget was, that you do have to revise that budget in a sense, because a couple of things. I think a lot of people use a budget to say, am I doing a good job? I think Mark said that earlier. How am I doing? Now, did I do what I said I was going to do? It can be pretty defeating if midway through the year that because of reorgs or something else happened, you didn't get a particular funding. Then every month you're like, we didn't meet our numbers. But everyone knew you wouldn't be able to. And so rather than beating yourself up over it to really change that. And I think also sometimes if something like that happens, that might impact how you deploy your expenses. Do you have to reduce your personnel staff? Do you have to do certain different things? So I think I said in the last episodes, I love budgets. I love budgeting. I love the process. I think that it's a useful tool to help an organization not just set up expectations and plan for what's happening and to also measure their performance against it, but it really does help really think about how do I react to something when it's not going according to plan, or in a positive way, if something huge came up and like a new program came about that wasn't unexpected, how do I need to hire people, bring people on, because the budget and the kind of that thought process of what's going on in the business helps drive those conversations. It's what you do with that information once it's done that is really critical to the organization.
Thanks, Tammy, for saying much more eloquently what I was trying to say. I appreciate it.
Anytime, AJ.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Profitless on Purpose. We really appreciate you joining us either on YouTube or listening through the pod. I actually had a friend tell me this week that she and one of her work buddies are listening to our podcast. It's a little odd to think that there are people out there listening to us, and we love to connect with you. So feel free to add a comment to our YouTube or shoot us a tweet at ProfitlessPod. Until next time, we appreciate you being here. See you later.
Thanks, everybody.